But thank you so much for the organization and also Gabor for inviting me to do a presentation. It's an honor for me to be in your great conference. And it's a pity I cannot join you there, but perhaps next time. I'd like to share you some experiences on remote auditing and the use of ICT in Fssc 22000. So first I'd like to give you an overview of Fssc. Let me see to go to the next slide. And that's not working. Yeah, there it goes. Okay, so some information, Fssc 22000. We are a food safety management system certification scheme. On the left side, you can see that we have our partners, the certification bodies, but also training organizations and accreditation bodies we work together with. And at the moment, we have already even more than 27,000 certified organizations around the world. We are growing quite fast, but we always say it's not about growing fast, it's about the quality of the audits and reliability of the audits and the certificates. On the right side, you see the scope, the scope of Fssc 22000, the sectors where it can be used. And you can see it's almost from farm to fork, covering almost all the different sectors, not only food manufacturing, but also food packaging materials. And I also see there's a lot of delegates coming from the food service, catering industry, hotels and restaurants. You can see that's also covered in the scope, and even retail is covered. So it is a supply chain certification program for food safety management. I think what's also important is to understand a little bit about Fssc if you don't know it already. We use three components. We use the international standard ISO 22000. You know, probably this standard can be used in the whole food supply chain. And it's, I think, one of the most recognized standards for food safety management systems. Then we ask for using a technical specification for the prerequisite programs. These are also international standards or technical specifications like the ISO 22002 series for the different sectors. And we have a number of additional requirements that we have issued ourselves if they're not covered by these international standards. So that is in short the components of Fssc 22000. And without going in detail, I think what is quite unique is that Fssc 22000 is a non-profit foundation. We are truly independent. We don't have any shareholders or other organizations telling us how to do the business. We are governed by a board of stakeholders. These are the representatives from the different stakeholders in the food supply chain. And what is also important is our integrity program, what is used to make sure that the audits are reliable, and we are recognized by the Global Food Safety Initiative. Looking at remote auditing and use of ICT, I think we all recognize that COVID-19 that speeded up or accelerated the use of it. And we also monitored this, of course, during the pandemic. And we also looked at our program where ICT and remote auditing can be used. First of all, what we think is important is to, when you use ICT or remote auditing, you have to ensure that the audits are still effective and reliable and robust. You cannot compromise the quality of the audits and the reliability of the certificates. So we decided to start with remote auditing, but only partly. And that was also allowed by the Global Food Safety Initiative. We also looked what is available already on this topic. And one of the things that we saw is that the IAF issued a number of mandatory documents that gave very good input on the requirements and how to do remote auditing effectively and the use of ICT. What we have done, we have published a number of documents. I cannot go through it in detail in this presentation, but you can find it on our website. We have two options. One option is the partly remote auditing. We really believe that that is the best approach, and it works also in practice. There are now more than 1,000 remote audits have been conducted, and we monitor that, of course, very carefully. And that is a partly remote audit that is allowed every time, so not only in the pandemic. But at the moment that there was a lot of full lockdowns and the audits were not possible at all, the physical audits, we also decided to have a possibility in those extraordinary situations to have a full remote audit. But that is only allowed when physical audits cannot be conducted at all, when it's impossible. So that is an exception. It's also not recognized by the GFSI, but yeah, in these situations we said what is better, not to do an audit at all or to do a full remote audit when it's allowed. But we have strict regulations and rules for that. So first of all, if you look at the documents that we use, I said it already, there are some documents from the International Accreditation Forum, the MD4, and there is a document, the ID3. The MD4 is a document covering requirements for the use of ICT and also on the competence of personnel. And the IAF ID3, that is a document that explains how you can do a risk assessment to look if there is a serious event and if remote audits can be done. So these documents are mandatory for our certification bodies to use if they want to do remote auditing and if they want to use ICT. The first approach is the partly remote audit, and yeah, that's in place and that can be used now, but also we think in future. We really think that this is a good approach, and you can see here on the screen that it is a two-step approach. First of all, there is a remote audit that can be a desktop audit using ICT. Then the second part is an on-site physical audit. We said it shall be at least 50% of the duration of the full audit, and together that makes a full audit. So this is really a partly remote audit that we allow not only now, but also we think in future, because we see the results up until now are very good. And as I said, this is also recognized by the Global Food Safety Initiative. That is the organization that has recognized Fssc 22000. So we are all aligned with other stakeholders that this is a good approach for a food safety management audit. We require first a risk assessment. That is coming from that documents from the IAF. So what we require from the certification body is that they do a risk assessment, and that risk assessment has to show that remote, partly remote audit is possible, and that also the results of previous audits show that an organization is mature enough to have that remote audit. So first they need to do a risk assessment to see if all the conditions are in place to allow that risk remote audit. And the second assessment we require is a feasibility assessment. And that's different. That is really looking if the remote audit and the use of the ICT are feasible. If the techniques are in place, if the organization is able to have a remote audit, if the understanding and the training of people is there. So it really needs to do an assessment to look if it's feasible to do that remote audit and to use ICT. And then, the remote audit is also not allowed for all the different kinds of audits. First of all, we said for all the follow-up audits like surveillance or recertification audits, you can use it. But for initial audits, so when it's a first audit, it is not possible to do it. Within Fssc audit, an initial certification audit is the first time that an auditor comes to a site, and we believe that that's one of the most critical moments when the auditor does the first audit. They really have to go in depth to the hazard assessment and the hazard analysis, and they also see the production for the first time. So for an initial audit, this is only allowed partly and not for a full audit. So these are the conditions to do the audits. So if you look at a full remote audit, well, I said it already, this is only allowed when a physical audit cannot be conducted at all. So when it's impossible, so it's really an exemption. And we decided to allow that, as I said, because you can say, listen, if you cannot do an audit, what is then better? Not stop with the certification, that is then the only option you can have. Or should you then allow a full remote audit? And in these exceptionary conditions, we believe it's better to have a full remote audit. Not ideal. We still believe that a partly remote audit is the best option, but in these situations, we believe you have to give an option to do at least an audit, then it's full remote. Again, what we require is a risk assessment. That's the same requirement. And also we require that feasibility assessment. So that is still a condition in place. And we are now reviewing also if we keep this in place in future with other crisis situations, if we think that this is reliable enough for these situations. So if you look at the full remote, it replaces a full audit. It shall also cover all the requirements. Yeah? So the certification body still needs to review all the requirements of our standards. And also it's important that it's not allowed for an initial audit. I said in the beginning that partly remote is not allowed with an initial audit, that is, but then 50% of the time the audit shall be on site. And that's not possible with a full remote audit. So for an initial audit, we do not allow a full remote audit. That is not allowed there. Also, when you look at the application, so not for new certification, also when there in a previous audit has been critical non-conformities, and we have a grading in Fssc 22000. So when there is a critical non-conformity, you cannot use this to close out the critical non-conformity, and it should also be allowed for surveillances and recertification. If you look at the website, we have this decision tree. So this is a decision tree showing what kind of audits can be used, and what are the conditions. So in what situations can certification bodies use what kind of audits. What is important, it's always voluntary. And so we say it's never mandatory to have remote audits. It's always an agreement between the certified organization and the certification body. So they have to do it in agreement with each other. Go to a website, you can find this in the annex, and you can use this also to make your own choices. I like to finish without going in detail with some experiences and tips for practice. This is also shared from certification bodies with us. First of all, for remote auditing and the use of ICT, preparation is key. It's critical and crucial to have the good preparation. So the certification body and the auditor shall have close contact with the food organization. They need to make a good plan. Planning is very important, to have a good plan, that everyone knows what is the plan and who needs to be available when, and that is very important. But also it's very important to prepare and review documents. We see that for remote auditing, the preparation and the review of documents before the audit is even more important than with physical audits. So the auditor really has to work very close together before the audit with the organization to ask for certain documents and to review these documents. And also, make sure that the tools are in place, and to test and check if the ICT tools are working, because there can be situations where it doesn't work. And we see that also, I think, with all our experience now with Teams and with other digital solutions and meetings, that ICT can work great, but also can give big challenges. So preparation is key. During the audit, two parts. First of all, the review of documents. That is more the easier part, and also the interviews. We see that is really feasible. Again, prepare it very well. Make sure you have right tools. Try not to read all documents during that remote audit interview, because that will take a lot of time. Perhaps you split screens that you can see document one part and your auditee on the other part, so that helps. But again, make sure that the ICT tools are working. That is very important. Even more critical is doing the audit on site. When you want to review the processes, that is even more difficult in some cases. But it's possible. You can use, of course, cameras. Make sure, think about air plugs, front-back cameras, all kinds of tips you can see here. That helps very much. But we have to realize that reviewing production processes or processes is more difficult remotely than doing physically. And we prefer, therefore, partly remote audit, where you do most of the interviews and the review of documents, do that then in the remote part, but then in the second part, the physical audit, do the review of the processes. So these are a number of tips and hints. And I'm sure that you will receive this presentation also, so you can read it more in detail after this conference. So I'd like to end my presentation to make sure we have some time for questions and answers. I hope this gave you some insights from the use of ICT and remote auditing in Fssc 22000. So thank you very much, and give it back to you, Gabor.